Welcome, welcome, welcome all. I am Chris Gorman. I work at the Center for Educational Innovation. And typically my role focuses on supporting teaching and learning in STEM disciplines and continues to in the time of COVID. And today's discussion is part of a series of discussions designed to bring together folks teaching courses with experiential components. And of course, today's discussion will be focused on science labs. So I will be recording this session and then also consolidating notes from both what's verbally presented or discussed and what is also exchanged in the Q&A. The goal from all this is that we can share any good ideas and resources that are shared here broadly with the university community. And it also helps me share any ideas that are presented here with the next discussion about science labs that's next week, which is basically a reprise of this same one, but with some other folks in it. And so a big thank you. I've got Barbara Beers and JD Walker from CEI helping me to monitor the Q&A and also to take notes. So you may hear from them if I miss something and we want to bring it forward. All right, so based on our registrations, you all are teaching courses in things like physics, chemistry, biology, neuroscience, horticulture, plant biology, biological anthropology, educational psych, and a few others. If I missed your field and you really want to bring it forward, feel free to toss it into the Q&A if you'd like. If you're curious if anybody else from your discipline is in the session. Sorry, just trying to be in the right window to advance the slides. And the goal for today is that we can share ideas and problem solve together in order to help you as you plan your courses. And our immediate focus is on supporting those of you who are teaching this summer, which based on our registrations is about a third of you. And then I also know that a lot of you are here because you're teaching a lab course in the fall or and are wanting to gather ideas depending on what happens over the next few months. And so as we go through this discussion, I really encourage our summer instructors to take advantage of the Q&A to ask your questions either of the panelists or throwing it out to the whole group. So I've disabled the chat for this one because we've got quite a few folks here. So far we've got about 64 folks in this session, so I don't want the chat to get overwhelmed. So we're going to use the Q&A. And then the goal, so what you can do is use that Q&A to put in your questions, like I said, either for each other or for the panelists. And if you see a question where maybe you've got a resource or an idea or something you've tried, feel free to respond to one another, both in that Q&A. And then also you can always raise your hand and I'd be happy to call on you. So the structure for our session is that we're going to talk about two main topics. And if there's time, we'll toss in a third, but I think those two are going to probably eat up most of our time, which is first talk about how it is that folks have gone about replicating the hands-on components for their lab courses, and then turn to talking about how you can facilitate groups in a lab setting, since that was the other piece of these lab courses that was of particular interest to those of you who registered. So great. Without further ado, I think I already mentioned this, but the Zoom tools, ask the questions using that Q&A. It's down here at the bottom, or while I'm screen sharing, it's up here at the top. You can upvote questions. So if you see a question where you're like, yes, please address that, click upvote, and then you don't have to put the question in again. And also respond to each other's questions. Like I said, I kind of see this as something where we may have two streams of people getting the information they need, both from us presenting and doing our best verbally, and then also from those of you answering each other's questions in that Q&A. And then of course, if you want to contribute, maybe you've taught online or you had an experience or something happened that worked really well this semester where you converted your course to online. Feel free to raise your hand. I can then allow you to talk and you can share as well. And so without further ado, I'll introduce the 5 folks that I've invited here today. I think I've got at least, I have 4 of these folks logged in, and we're designated as panelists. So I've got Neil Anderson from horticulture, Pete Border from physics, Charlotte Romaine from medical laboratory sciences, and Charlie Willis from biology, teaching and learning. Along with Callie Bigankowski, who is also in CBS, the College of Biological Sciences, as the academic technologist. And those 5 folks have done science labs online, and not just in spring 2020, but have for years. I don't know who clocks in at the most number of years. Pete, I know, has been doing this for 10. So, and they're excited to share their experience. And so without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and these slides and start our discussion. All right. So what I want to do is first focus on how it is that we can replicate some of the hands-on components of our labs in an online setting. And I want to focus on two ways that often come up. And one way is thinking about how do we provide the lab experience, maybe through videos or some kind of experiential simulation. And then how do you do maybe at-home laboratories where basically the student's home becomes the laboratory. So I'll first kind of turn to those of you who've tried these sort of videos or simulations or lab recreations to maybe share a little bit about what that's been like in your class and what works well, and what are some of the challenges about that. Would any of our panelists feel, Neil, should I turn to you?
Hi, this is Neil. I'd be happy to jump in. So the course that we've been teaching for about three and a half years, completely online now, with a lab component is floral design, Hort 1113. And how we arranged to replicate those in-class experiments and so forth was we videotaped everything in the last time that we taught it live. So they had all the actual videos. These were then edited by our IT staff in the college. And then students are given very specific lists of instructions of what to do to be able to replicate a specific floral design, for instance, each week in their lab assignment. And they then submit either pictures or videos of their completed lab assignment for grading, as well as it also gets submitted to their lab group for a collegial critique of it.
Great. Charlotte, do you mind sharing a little bit about how the labs work over in medical laboratory sciences that you've been teaching?
So up until this semester, what we have is a hybrid program. So we are part of the time in the lab and part of the time not in the lab. We use Storyline a lot for our online presentations. And then we do a flipped classroom. So like a lot of the material is online for them to look at, done in Storyline. So Storyline lectures. And then we do flipped things in class. In my class, I use a lot of videos. And after this spring, for next spring, this fall, I'm going to try to work on videotaping every single one of my labs so that they have that information of how to do each step of the lab before we get to lab. One thing that I did this semester, since we are not in the lab at all, a couple of my labs, I did assign them to figure out how to do a home lab. So we did DNA extraction at home and we did chromatography at home. And then I had them do a FlipGrid video discussion and show us their process and their results. And that was kind of fun to watch all the FlipGrids and see the student results to see if they actually got DNA. I'm just getting the chromatography results in, but those look pretty good too. So, I mean, having the students be creative about what do I have at home that I could use to set up a chromatography, experiment. To have them critically think about what's happening at each step, what things in my house do I have that I can do with that, and then have them present that to the rest of the students.
So Rachel Olson wants to know, DNA extraction, was it from buccal cells or fruit?
So I kind of let them open it up to them. Most students did fruit. One student decided to try hamburger. Another student, a couple of students did like vegetables. The fruit worked the best because it's easiest to mash up, but yeah. And some students got creative because they did not have any alcohol at home. And so one student tried 120 proof rum. Some other students tried some hand sanitizers. So it was good. I think it was fun, and I think the students kind of had to think through what do I have that I can use, and then they told us what they thought didn't work about, or what did or didn't work about what they did. So
nice. With that, I actually want to turn a little bit to Charlie. So Charlie has been teaching biology labs for a few...
Sorry, Chris, I had my mic muted to say this. There's another question here about the storyline that Charlotte mentioned. Could you say a little bit more about this? There was a question if this is articulate storyline with a high cost yearly fee.
Yeah, so our department invested in storyline when we decided to go to the hybrid module. So yeah, I don't know what to say.
I would love to speak to that just a little bit. Articulate storyline, yes, it has a very high learning curve and has cost, and we have used that in the past, and the way it integrates with Canvas is through SCORM packages. There are limitations for that. One is that you don't get question by question data. You just get like a final answer. And it became really problematic for maintenance. While it may be very whiz-bang to get started, to be able to make edits or do fixes requires somebody who knows how to use Articulate Storyline and can access all the original materials. And what we're finding is that those that were using it like had won a grant or had hired somebody for a short time to build these things, and we were only able to use them for about another 2 to 3 years. Charlie can also speak to all the other issues we had with those. The SCORM integration just did not work well for us in Canvas or Moodle from back then.
Yeah, we had, I took over the course with those SCORM packages built, and there was built-in storyline. So I couldn't really edit them. I didn't have any background in that, so that was a limitation. And we ran into a lot of technical hiccups with different browsers. Those have since kind of been resolved to lesser extent. We still use a few storyline-based instructional tools, as long as they're all consistently using the same browser, which is now a requirement for our online course because we use a different Proctorio needs everyone to use Chrome. And so we figured out how to get it to work on that so that they can be resolved, but there is a learning curve, as Callie said, to getting them set up.
And we have a small department, and so we all build our own storylines. We don't have people to do that. So if I need to go back and rewrite things or re-record or whatever, I have all the files.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I will come to another question too that just came up a little bit, kind of curious about how you're using FlipGrids. So Erin, I'll first start your question with FlipGrids, a tool that's actually homegrown, developed at the U. It's fully integrated with Canvas, and what it allows students to do is record short videos. I think the max is 5 or 10 minutes, and then they can record responses to a set of videos. So these I think are called a grid. And then, so you can post a video, then have your students post responses, or students can post, you could have one student group present a presentation and then have others give them feedback or commenting. In a lab setting, it could be useful if you typically have folks give presentations in lab and then need critique from others or feedback, that can be a tool where it really quickly kind of consolidates the set of student presentations. And then Charlotte, how are you using it this semester?
Like I said, for these home labs, I'm using it kind of as an engagement tool for the students, because I felt like since we weren't together twice a week like we used to be, I was starting to lose some students. And so I wanted to like pull people back in and get them engaged. And so I asked them to do this home DNA extraction, and then they just videotape their results. And I'm not requiring the students to respond to any other students' videos this semester, but I have in the past for other classes required that they respond to at least one. Does that answer the question?
And we use FlipGrid a lot too, and we use it for group introduction, so it's really good for establishing kind of group dynamics, putting a face to a name. We use it for feedback, not only like what did they do, but what didn't they understand from that week. And they're, like you said, Charlotte, they're really fun to watch. I find them really entertaining, and pretty useful to kind of really assess what they know and what they don't know, rather than just like a written summary. So anytime you can incorporate some kind of video component, I would highly recommend it, especially if you have group work going on, so that they can kind of, it's just so much easier to tell what a student understands when they have to actually verbalize it than when they can copy and paste something they found online.
Yeah. Hey, Charlie, can I back us up a second? And then I want to turn and also come to Pete. But can you explain, so Charlie's labs work such that you kind of, instead of trying to replicate or bring the student to the lab, you actually make the student's home the lab space, and through the use of lab kits. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what that structure is for your course, and what kind of some of the pros and cons are for you about doing it that way. Yeah,
totally. So I do 2 online intro bio courses, and one course, both of them require a lab kit. One course is a 5-week lab where they're growing yeast strains and testing the efficacy of different UV protectant products on these UV sensitive yeast. So does 50 SPF work just as well as 30 SPF, or does this company's spray on tan work better than this one at protecting UV damage? So they have to wholly design their experiment from scratch. They have, in the kit, they're given Petri dishes. They have to pour the dishes. They have to come up with an experiment with their team and then execute it at home. And it's pretty entertaining. I think it's daunting a lot for students, because, they're doing everything on their own. There's no TA there to help answer any immediate questions. And we provide, both Neil and Charlotte talked about videos. Callie and the original instructor who invented or designed the lab have a series of videos they can watch to see how to do certain things. We also have videos from the company that provides the kit, and really detailed instructions about what they need to do and when they need to do it. And that's a lot for students to digest. And so just videos are really helpful, I find. I think it's good for a subset of students to watch. Written instructions are useful for another subset, so we try to provide some redundancy there. And then the other course I teach is general bio, and they have a lab kit where they do 2 different experiments with their team and then 1 individual experiment. And all of those are, 2 of them are looking at starch digestion from amylase, the enzyme amylase, and then the other one's looking at tropism in plants. So I could get into the details of each one of them, but they all require either utilizing the material in the kit and then using a few at-home, very simple or easily available materials in addition to the lab kit. So, and for the most part, the instruction is written with video examples. So for things that are particularly technically challenging, like pouring plates or plating out yeast, we provide videos so that they can see what it looks like versus just reading what that is supposed to do.
And then Charlie, can you say a little bit more about the lab kits? There's a bunch of questions that are coming in about, do you make them? Do you use the company? How much do the students pay? And I know that when you and I talked before, that if you could just share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we use Caroline Biological Supply for one of them, and NASCO for the other one. And so they are pre-assembled. They're a la carte, or like we kind of designed them, so they built them for us. They're based on kind of pre-existing lab kits, but we kind of picked and choose what we wanted. And the students buy them at the beginning of the semester, so they have to pay for them. But I think they waive their lab fees. Am I right on that, Callie?
Yeah, she mentioned it in the kit.
Yeah, so if it helps, the way this wound up working out is in Carolina, we are actually using a kit they designed for a classroom. And each student orders the classroom kit that gives them plenty of supplies to do multiple replicates of their experiments. Mm-hmm. But it means they are switching between using like teacher instructions and student instructions. There are advantages to Carolina because they are providing the kits. They vetted that these are safe for at-home use, and they have like insurance-y things that would help out if there was ever a concern. eNASCO is more of a build from scratch kind of thing. You can build whatever you want from there. The prices are very reasonable. They put the kits together and ship them to the bookstore. And then students buy from the bookstore and the bookstore ships out. In the case of Carolina, there is both a kit and there are perishables, the yeast. And the bookstore has vouchers for the kits, and students go to the Carolina site and either redeem a voucher or pay directly for their kit there, and Carolina ships it out to them.
Yeah, and I've had students order the kit. Like I had a student who took the course in China, and they had it shipped to China. So they will ship them anywhere, and the students have been able to utilize them. I had one student who took their kit with them on a trip to Europe and did stuff there.
I finally got my thing working, and I've been teaching a physics course online, 2 of them, for 10 years. And we started with NASCO and then gave up on them because they just were not doing what we wanted. And they, would have problems getting something, and they just ship it without that component.
Mm.
I'd find out about it when it came to that week of the class, and what little rubber balls?
Who are you using now, Pete?
Good luck with that. And the bookstore, there were a lot of difficulties with changing anything because, they have some left over from the year before, and they want to sell those. And if the new ones are different, they don't care. They're going to sell the old ones. And again, they don't tell you, it never got back to me. So what we do now is there's a list of links to Amazon. And every year before school starts, I go through it and make sure everything is still there. And they get sent that, and they order everything from Amazon, pay for it themselves, and they're perfectly free if they, to share. If there are 4 of them who want to share a kit, great, go ahead. And it's all Amazon supplies. So, they run out too sometimes, but then I hear about it right away. And I can go dig up a substitute and send that out. So this has proven to be actually much better than going through NASCO and the bookstore.
Can you say more about, Pete, about how your labs are set up and how students engage with the activities?
The way they're set up is back when we started this, I went through and spent a long time cooking up lab experiments that they could do at home reasonably, and wrote up the lab manual, and the students, they get the stuff and then they do the experiments at home. If they are unable to get it to work, which does happen, there's no TA around to help them with anything, then there's a set of data that I got when I did it, and they're free to analyze that. There's also video of me actually doing every lab and talking about it while I do it. So, they have something to watch, and if it fails, they can analyze the supply data, and it is actually pretty durable. Pretty much everybody turns in something. The backup data, they don't all just use that. They actually go out and try and do it, which is good. It depends a lot on being clever about what kind of things they're going to have at home. And, there's like one lab we do where they take a Nerf gun and they shoot it and measure how much it drops, and from that you can get the muzzle velocity, figure that out, and then next week they use that to predict how high up it will go if they shoot it straight up, and what the maximum range is. So they have to go outside and do that. And just about everybody can get their hands on a Nerf gun. Quite a few of them borrow it from their nephews. So you have to be really clever about putting these labs together. And a lot of it, I've found that they actually enjoy the parts where they have to wing it. There's things like, here's a ramp and the instruction, they roll things down a ramp. Well, the instructions just say, prop it up to a height that gives a nice speed. And people write in their lab reports, I used this many books under it, or they're proud of how they had to figure it out. So that works pretty well. There are things that I would do differently if I was going to start right now with it. For example, phone cameras are much better than they were when we started. And we would use that a lot.
Thanks, Pete.
So, it takes a lot of thought and effort. That's about all there is to say.
Yeah, so let me turn to this other question too that I know a few of you have, so I think as we're thinking about moving science labs online, one of the most important parts about this and about any course is to focus on which learning objectives you're trying to reach through your lab. So is it, is the lab designed to solidify or to reinforce concepts from lecture? Is the lab designed to teach techniques? Is it designed to have students gain some sort of tactile understanding of an abstract concept? Or is it also to, learn the inquiry or experimental design process? And I know this was one of the questions that came up prior to the registrations. And I want to turn to that next. Now I'm realizing I didn't check in on the Q&A, but I think there are a couple of more questions about lab kits. One of them is about liability. And I don't know if anybody knows directly about whether or not, I know that for chemistry, for example, when you purchase third party, they assume liability. And if we were to distribute them ourselves, I think we pick it up, but I would be more than happy to follow up on this question unless one of our panelists knows about it offhand. Callie, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I do know a little bit. When we designed the one that we bought from Carolina, they take on, like the kit was not made for an at-home lab, but they looked into it, investigated it, and said, yes, that was sufficient. When it came to us investigating options for labs, we contacted DEHS here at the University of Minnesota, and there's a lot of resources on that site. And we were able to determine, like, were the materials we were using safe, and you can work with them, I think, to actually look at labs if you need to. But like for me, it was basically, is this yeast going to be okay? And it turns out it was a native found yeast. It wasn't genetically engineered or anything. So we were kind of okay that way. And for the rest of the ones we get from ANASCO, there are some chemicals and other things in there. And it's really about making sure that you design the labs in such a way that you are not just thinking about shipping and about hazards to people, but also disposal. So it's about using very small amounts and considering micro experiments. If you're doing color changes and stuff, you don't use test tubes, you use a little dish and it's like a few drops of things so that you can limit the amount that's there. And you want to make sure that disposal into public sewage systems is also an option. But there are concerns around that if you actually expect your online students to be doing this all like while they're in dorms, because that is a much bigger cluster versus being spread out across the country taking your class. So there are definitely things to consider.
Well, thank you.
We had looked at that too for our lab kits. And since all the materials we have in our lab kits are things that you can normally buy in the store without any permission, we didn't end up with any liability issues. So.
Nice. Thank you. So now I want to kind of turn to kind of that inquiry and taking advantage of the fact that students are at home and therefore maybe designing their own experiments can be both opportunity and challenge. For those of you who've had opportunity to kind of leverage that inquiry while doing at-home labs or at a distance, do you mind chiming in on that?
Yeah, I'll go. I think, and this kind of echoes what like Charlotte and Pete were saying, like you have to expect a lot of failure. It's basically, you have to readjust your expectations. They're going to fail. They're going to get frustrated doing it. But then you also see some really cool creative things, like they'll try extracting DNA from hamburgers or doing something cool with a Nerf gun, or I don't know. I think you have to reorient what your expectations are for your lab. A lot of the labs we do on campus, we're like, the way you get credit for this lab is by doing these things correctly. Whereas at the home labs are like, you just need to try it. And then you have to be able to explain to me why it might've gone wrong or what went wrong. And that's a much different way of kind of approaching our, so then the learning objectives change slightly too. It's less about repeating or re-emphasizing what were the content from the course and more about the experimental design and interpretation and data analysis and that sort of thing. So
yeah, that's a really good point. The home labs are, like you say, you can't have a list of do this, do this, do this. They're, you know, explore it, look at it, try and can you figure this out kind of things. And yeah, you have to be ready for all kinds of stuff. And you know, I always ask them at the end, just answer the question, what could change about this that would make it better? And that seems to really make them think about it and what are we trying to do? So
yeah, and the other thing that Charlie mentioned was like Pete, I think having the data sets. And I think that's important too, to have students work through data and go through the scenarios. And like in our laboratories, things like running controls and things like that are always important. So having data sets where controls didn't work or where patient samples are outside the ranges, having those data sets and having them go through that and think through those issues, I think.
Yeah, I think if you definitely want like a deliverable, like you need to be able to interpret these results or like this pattern, you need to have some data prepackaged that you can share with them. Or a lot of what I do often is, okay, an experiment didn't work, your yeast didn't grow, make a figure with showing me what your results would look like if they support your hypothesis and what they would look like if they didn't. And then at least I can see kind of like, are they actually thinking about this correctly, and assess it that way without actually having them to have completed something.
yeah.
And then Jeremy, I'm going to bring up a question from Jeremy, which is, do you get a lot of angst from students who just want to know what to do? I'm getting a lot of knowing nods. Does anyone want to? I'll go Charlie first, and then I'll go to Charlotte's knowing nod.
I think that I don't necessarily think that's probably any different than when they were in labs on campus. Those students are always going to be anxious about that. The difference is they have to wait 24 hours, you know, before they can get an answer to their question. And so that can probably be a little stressful. And so you try to preemptively explain for the labs, like, you're going to be doing a lot of this on your own. We're here to help you through it. You need to let us know if it's not working so that we can give you better, like we can guide you through it and not wait till the last minute. And so I usually have, for the first couple labs, like I'm really forgiving about like messing up or coming in late or doing stuff incorrectly or not following along or missing something. Cause I want to let them know that I'm here to help and not like kind of punitively get after them for not doing what they should be doing. And so later on, they feel more comfortable exploring stuff and trying things and reaching out and being like, can I do this? Can I try this? You know? But yeah.
And are any of you utilizing TAs in these online labs? Neil, go ahead.
Yes, I have a TA in my class every semester.
And how do you use them?
Well, they help field answers to questions that students raise through Canvas. So, you know, we might get 3 to 10 questions per week coming in of just specifics about lab questions or angst or whatever it might be. And then the TA also does specific grading assignments every week. So, and then I do some, but the TA does the bulk of them.
Sure.
I actually, so when I first started teaching, I was predominantly in charge of the labs, and I had a TA help with some minor grading things, but now I've transitioned to where if you have a TA you're comfortable with, I like leading the labs in the same way we would do it on campus. And I'm there, but I have my TAs do all of the lab grading. I have them like send out regular notes to students about what they need to make sure they're doing for that week. And they're the point person to ask questions about the lab, and then I can answer things that the TA can't quite figure out. So I've really kind of shifted it, the lab stuff to the TAs. So if you have competent TAs, yeah, that's entirely possible.
And then can you talk about what would be, so the majority of the folks in this session have never led an online lab before. So they're going to be designing labs and potentially with kits and materials that they've never quite done before. Is there any sort of prep for those TAs that's particularly useful? So Charlie, are these students who've taken this course before, or have they done the labs before? Or how do you prepare them to be able to field the questions?
I recruit them from my on-campus version of the course. So they're TAs that have TA'd before. So they have experience TAing, they have experience working on Canvas and dealing with students. And then at the beginning of the semester, I kind of walk them through what the semester is going to look like, what they should be, what my expectations for them are every week, and how they should be communicating with students. And then I send them a weekly to-do list, basically. Like, these are what you need to grade, that I want this graded before this. And just most of the time they're on top of it already, but it's just kind of, as with any online class, you need regular communication, and that's true of working with your TAs as it is with the students. So.
Great. All right, I'm going to take one more kind of about recreating hands-on labs, and I'm going to throw a question to you that we may actually end up throwing back to the chat. But the first is, someone's teaching a neuroscience lab, and it's not experimental. The goal is learning where the structures are and forming a 3D model in their brain, in their own brains, of the anatomy. And I know that this is not the only course like this. Just as a side note, there are a few folks who are doing anatomy, or they're from earth science, where again, or biological anthropology, where again, kind of that. Working with specimens. And so Martin goes on to say, in person, they can examine and handle brains. Any suggestions about how to handle this? Models are, of course, quite expensive. I don't know if any of you on the panel, or if those of you who are listening have ideas to toss them into that Q&A.
I'll speak to it a bit if you'd like.
Yeah.
I have two ideas. One is, especially for anatomy and phys, there are some very good programs out there that have 3D modeling of human anatomy and potentially some other anatomy things that you might be able to find simulations that would work. The one I was thinking of, CLA has 3D imaging and Elevator. So CLA has 3D imaging capability. They also have Elevator, which is this place to store all that complex data. And then they also are integrated to Canvas so that they can deliver that 3D data that way. And their 3D images can be turned and manipulated and zoomed in, and maybe that's an option. I have no idea how hard that would be to do, but you might be able to do something like that through Lattice, L-A-T-I-S. We would have to maybe try and coordinate with them.
I'm also going to toss into the chat a link that is a crowdsourced Google Doc from faculty development professionals, folks who works in centers for teaching and learning like myself, who've collected laboratory simulations and online labs. It's sorted by discipline, and I think there are some anatomy things there, and it's constantly getting added to. Okay. Great, and it looks like Samantha Porter is willing to help find existing 3D resources online, so hopefully you all can connect as well after this. Great, so I want to turn now to facilitating groups. So someone already asked about this, and one of you already mentioned that you have students working in groups. And one of the things I think for a lot of folks when you teach lab science, right, is that it's not just that you're doing it in the lab, it's that it's also where you learn to do group and teamwork. And how do we still maintain some of that in the online space? Anyone want to? Yeah.
I have students do homework in groups, which I pick out, and they communicate through the discussion forum on Canvas. And I would love to have lab groups, but given that they're scattered over the globe, it's not real convenient. You know, what the ones who can work together do. I know a lot of them go over to each other's houses to do these things, but one of the real original design goals was that you can do this anywhere, and we have stuck to that. We've never had anybody take the course from jail, and I'm just waiting to see what a warden would do with a Nerf gun. But, you know, this is doubtless going to happen. So working in groups, yeah, it's essential to lab work, and I don't really know how to do it well, given the constraints we're under with this.
So Charlie, tell me a little bit about how it works with your class.
Yeah, so our labs are designed to be done in groups, and the groups in our courses, they work on their homework and in the labs on the same group. So they're with each other the whole semester. And we've had to be creative about how the labs would work and the expectations for how they would participate with each other and share data. But generally what it looks like is they, as a team, have to come up with a research question through, we use Canvas discussion boards a lot because it allows for more asynchronous communication. You can come in and participate whenever you have time. And then they'll design an experiment based on that question. They usually use some experimental template that we provide them. Everyone in the group has to try it. Then they share and come together on kind of a consensus of what they want to do. And then depending on the experiment, they have to carry out their component of the experiment. And sometimes they're really good at replicating aspects of the experiment. Other times one person will do one thing, another person will do another thing, and they have to kind of come to an understanding of what that data means and how much confidence they can have in it. But it does require coordination across teams and making sure they get stuff done in time. But we try to give them as much flexibility to that end as possible, because like you said, they're around the globe, or around the country at least. So it's so far worked really well, and we get some really cool group projects out of it and some group collaborations. So yeah, and I could talk more about it too, but we do it for most of our labs. So
I'll turn to Neil, and then I'll see if there are more specific questions that come up.
I was just going to point out that we do our labs differently, it sounds like, from a lot of the other panelists. Our labs are not done by all the students at the same time. They are during the same week. However, they may all do them independently and autonomously, or they might even come together and work at each other's houses to do that too. And so as a result, as far as the lab groups go, they're just working on critiquing what everyone has uploaded for a particular assignment in a particular week, so that it avoids, I guess, having a lot of issues connected with lab groups getting together and working simultaneously and so forth. So that's how we chose to do it in this design class.
Yeah, I should clarify, they're not required to do anything synchronously. They don't have to be in the same place at the same time. They're designed so that they can communicate by a certain date, like what they think about this experimental design, and then go and do it on their own time in a certain time frame. So they'll have a week to carry out their experiment and then share that data with their team, and then the team has to have a discussion about what that data means and coming up with a conclusion or a presentation or something like that. So we try to make it as asynchronous as possible, because I'm really, after having tried different iterations of online teaching, I think that flexibility is so crucial to making an online course run smoothly. Because yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, so it's an interesting balance between, collaboration, but in this sort of asynchronous format.
Michelle Dreesen has a comment in the chat too about having her students work at least on some of the experiments via Zoom in terms of collaborating on experimental design. So you all can check that out in the Q&A. I think I said chat. I meant to say Q&A.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. I've never had, I know a lot of people are doing like group breakout rooms and Zoom and collaborating on, and I've never made that a requirement of my labs because I can't assume everyone can come together at the same time for their labs. We've talked about it, like you have to sign up for this lab group based on a time of the week that you can meet, you know? And so we could guarantee everyone could be there at a time to talk, but there's no way of guaranteeing your class would meet a range of times. And so I really push for asynchronous meetups and discussion platforms that allow for people to check in when they have time to do it.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're hearing consistently from those who teach online as well, who want group work, is helping students to navigate the technological solutions which can bridge the gaps for groups. So although, especially now that we're in a situation where lots of people are working online and remotely, and so there's becoming more fluency with online tools, but helping students know what their options would be for connecting with them. So do you want them, telling them that they could meet all together all at once? They could use Hangouts or, Skype or Zoom, because they've all got accounts now, and kind of telling them how they could do that. Or here are some asynchronous ways to make sure, set up a Google Doc where everybody puts in their information, and having templates for that kind of stuff can really help to facilitate group work, just in the same way that
I've found that they know more about this stuff than I ever will. And,
yeah.
You just kind of give them the goal and say, communicate and collaborate. And
yeah, I second that. It's like we give them the structure in Canvas to do it so that we can check in and see what they're talking about in the discussion boards. But then I always say, like, if you want to have a more, in-depth conversation outside of this clunky discussion board, by all means, however you want to do it. Like they use GroupMe a lot. They use Google Hangouts a lot. They text each other all the time. So I think providing some basic structure is very useful, especially in Canvas, because that's where the course is going to be. But not requiring, allowing them to communicate.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, I'm going to turn to one other question that's come up, which is kind of returning to this question about at-home, for those who are doing at-home lab experiments. Is the sourcing of materials likely to be an issue as so many lab courses move online, potentially at once? Callie, are you hearing anything from the vendors? I know you've been in closer contact with them than most.
The vendors are a little more on top of it than they typically are. When you have a relationship with a vendor that you're working with, typically they reach out early on to ask, like, so where is your enrollment and what are you doing? I play the role of a coordinator, so I make sure I know what's going on, and I wind up reaching out, and like that process started about a month ago for the summer classes. So you're usually about 2 months ahead of time, and you're just letting them know, this is what we're expecting for enrollment. They are ramping up. And we've worked, and I know the other instructor said he had some problems with the eNASCO. We've actually had some good experiences with them. We found a new product being created by somebody else, and they sourced that and added it to the kits for us. But it is true, the bookstore keeps the old ones. So we had, there's some tricky years like that. I will admit, the idea of ordering everything online off Amazon is quite intriguing, actually. So I do like that idea too. But I think the vendors are really trying to ramp up. And if you're interested in a simulation or anything, the one thing you will know right now is everybody went free through the rest of spring because they want your business. So they are prepared to ramp up if you want to go fully online with your labs or you have a need for that. They will work with you because they know if they get you once, they might get you a lot more times. Because it's hard to set up. It is. It's hard to get a lab running the way you want it to and get all the supply channels worked out. And yeah.
And to that end, I mean, if it's a real concern, I mean, some labs I know probably can't get around using material, physical materials, but virtual labs might be an alternative worth looking into. And there's some, or not even virtual labs per se, but like sort of guided labs with data analysis and that kind of thing. You might just have to be kind of creative about how you do that kind of thing.
Yeah, there are a number of labs simulations depending on your discipline whereby students can manipulate many of the same sorts of apparatus that they would physically in the lab and see the outputs change and are able to take measurements in that way. It doesn't fully replace, but for some of you who have complex equipment or dangerous chemicals or substances, which would be normally used in a lab, those kinds of simulations may be one of the avenues to consider as well.
Yeah, I'm teaching a course that started out being in classroom this semester and then never came back after spring break. So we've been shoved into using virtual labs with that one because it's all happening so quickly. And there are a lot out there, you know, you can find things that they have a virtual digital voltmeter or something and we'll apply that. And some of them actually have flaws. They don't work quite right. Others are just fine. And some even come with instructions and questions, and you can just say, do this one. But they are fairly iffy, and you really have to get in there and dig into them and make sure they're doing the right things. And again, like everything else on the web, it changes unpredictably. You will get no notice that it's been replaced, and a reasonable assortment of your students will not have equipment that can run them. That's just the way it is.
All right, I'm going to turn to this question. Do you limit the number of instruction videos? Likewise, do you limit the time of each video? It seems like having too much to read through or an overuse of videos can feel overwhelming. How to find the sweet spot as you're kind of giving students the instructions for doing their work at home?
Well, when we set up our course, okay, I was going to say, when we set up our course, we have all the lecture videos and lab videos and the supportive ones and so forth. They're all limited to 3 to 5 minutes in length. So there might be, you know, anywhere between 1 to 5 videos for the lecture or more that they just go through in sequence, and they can repeat multiple times, but they can also then take a break in between if they get exhausted or whatever. So we deliberately set them up in short snippets.
Yeah, I think that's crucial, especially if they're technically oriented. Like, this is how you pour a plate. It's a 3-minute video, right? Like, that's all it needs to be, because that's what they're looking for. They don't want to watch 5 minutes about how you like then go and plate yeast or how you should label it. It should be very self-contained. And then written instructions should be very structured, I think. It's simple. You want to lean towards as little, or not over explaining things, because students get overwhelmed by the text. So like bullet points, like headers, like making sure everything is organized in a way that they can clearly see what they should be doing and what they're looking at, and not just like blocks of text. So, yeah.
And then how are you guys having students submit the work? So Charlotte mentioned the FlipGrid. And what are other ways that folks are having students submit work?
But I know there was a question in there about submitting lab assignments. And so we have them submit their lab worksheets through Canvas in an assignment. And if they submit it as a PDF or like a Word doc or something, then I can go on there and I can make comments directly on that document for them. So I can make comments about the things that they did, or about their data or things like that. We also heavily utilize the rubrics in the assignments in Canvas, because then if there's more than one of us grading, which there usually is, then it's much more,
equitable.
yeah, everybody's grading exactly the same way. And so the students aren't saying, well, she got this and I didn't get that or whatever. So we really heavily utilize the rubrics.
Yeah, and I've led a number of sessions with TAs in this pivot to teaching online this spring, and talking with them and also checking how whatever the formatting that you picked for students to turn in works with SpeedGrader is crucial. So, maybe there was a worksheet that used to work really well, but then the formatting gets mixed up and the tables get all screwed up when the students submit them, or the formatting is becoming difficult. And so some classes have been submitting work where they submit a whole PDF at a time, like Charlotte's describing, but others have turned them into Canvas quizzes that aren't time limited, that aren't time bound, where each answer to each question can be either a response or a file upload where they have students use their phones to take pictures or scan PDFs. To turn in more complex stuff, which again allows the use of rubrics and SpeedGrader on the back end. So I think the way to have students submit work also depends on what the workflow will be for grading and how many people you need to use it.
I have students just write down what they're doing on a piece of paper, take a photo of that and submit that, or scan it. And then I do all the grading. I don't have any TAs.
I know.
So I flip through it in SpeedGrader and just, are they doing something reasonable? And that's about all there is. So there's one grader and it's all uniform all the way through.
I'm going to answer one last. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say for the lab assignments that the students upload pictures for, in my case, I have it set up in Canvas such that I can make notes on the pictures and drawings that get sent back to them, and comments, of course. And then also I have a rubric, a table of grading rubric for every single assignment that all you do is click on it and get the points assigned instantly, which is so fast. So, I can grade 30 assignments in less than 30 minutes, along with adding comments. It's really fast.
Yeah, I do a mix of similar things. I think one of the things that was kind of echoed is having them, especially if you're doing at-home experimental setups, having them document what they're doing with pictures periodically so that they're actually doing it, and not just at the end giving you a report with some made-up figure, unless you ask them to make it up because their experiment didn't work. But I think documentation is a key part of any sort of process.
Nice. With our last 2 minutes, what I want to do is two things. One, I want to mention in the Q&A, Michelle Dreesen brought up that she's also used an electronic lab notebook, which I know she uses for her in-person class as well. I'm not going to put you on the spot, Michelle, but are you okay if someone wants to learn more about an electronic lab notebook, they could contact you? I'll let her respond there. Usually she's pretty okay, but I also know that this is a busy time for everyone. And then I'm going to launch a poll, which is, how would you like to continue connecting with this group? I know that there are a lot of questions beyond the scope here. I know one that's in the chat as well has to do with meeting the liberal education requirement. Lorraine, I've got your question out to Leslie Schiff in the Office of Undergrad Ed, and I'll get back to you on that one. And yeah, so as we kind of close, I've got two things. One is this poll, and then the other is to say thank you for joining us. Thank you so much to Callie, Charlotte, Charlie, Neil, and Pete for sharing their experience, both good, bad, and otherwise, about doing labs online. And then also know that the Center for Educational Innovation and other academic technology support services and your collegiate units are all here to support you as you transition any of these experiential courses online, and so we'd welcome continuing to connect with you. And finally, we would love to know how this session went. This is the first of this type of discussion. We're organized at the request of Provost Croson, and so we'd love to get better at doing them. So when you log out, there will be a link to a poll or to a quick feedback survey And I'll toss the link in the chat as well. And I'll stick around so we can have any questions. So if questions are continuing to come up, feel free to stay and we'll try and answer as many of them as we can. And if some of my panelists have to go, I totally understand.